I just witnessed the murder of my friend on his Snapchat story. I knew something was wrong the second I saw 5 missed calls from my friend Richie. I just never guessed how bad it actually was. That was, until I checked my Snapchat notification. It was a new story from Richie. He's my best friend and doesn't post often, so it must have been something serious. Maybe a relative died or something? I only realized how much worse it really was when I checked the story post. I opened Snapchat to see a story preview which was almost pitch black, except for one area that looked as if it were being lit by a flashlight. I clicked his name and the video opened. If only I had picked up his calls, maybe I could have saved him. My suspicions were confirmed when a nearly dark screen played, followed by the click of a flashlight, illuminating the hallway. I recognized the room as Richie's bedroom. Whoever was taking the video was humming softly. The flashlight was focused on the closer. It became brighter and brighter as the light moved closer, pausing for a second as the man finished humming, before throwing open the door. My stomach dropped as I stared at the small screen, which displayed a battered and sobbing Richie huddled in the corner of the closet. "Please just leave me alone, He stuttered, but was cut off as a gloved hand came into view, the light shining brightly off the polished leather. The hand was holding a gun. "No, please!" Bang! Richie's head rocked backwards as his brains exploded onto the back wall, eyes rolling into the back of his head, and blood pouring out of his nose like a crimson waterfall. I screamed and jumped so violently that my phone fell out of my hands, clattering face down onto the floor. I gasped for air and clung to the shelf for support, gurgling and coughing playing from the speakers of my phone, before a second gunshot rang out and the first video ended. The air seemed to stand still as the only sounds in the store were the hums of the refrigerator and my heavy breathing. I could feel the color drain from my face, my fingers turning ice cold. I collapsed to the floor. I heard a woman gasp and begin dialing someone. It had to be some sort of sick joke, right? I glanced over at my phone, willing myself to pick it up. The screen timer had expired, and I was faced with a black mirror, staring at the stranger in the reflection. Snapchat immediately opened back up, proudly displaying another entry to Richie's final story, posted 30 seconds ago. This one was a picture, a close-up of Richie's face. All the life had drained out of his eyes, and the wall and carpet surrounding his head was nothing but red. Positioned just above the bullet hole was a text box. "First person to view this story is next." The phone slid out of my hand and rested on my leg. I could see the flashing red and blue in the reflective glass of the fridge. The woman pointed over to where I was, and 2 uniformed men walked over. "Sir, what's wrong?" one of them asked, kneeling beside me. I tried to speak, but my mouth was too dry. I slowly turned to face him, staring deep into his eyes, before muttering 2243 Glen Cove Drive and pointing at Richie's story. The cops glanced at each other as one stood and took my phone. He watched the story before calling it in on his radio. The rest of the night is a blur. I remember my girlfriend Jessica arrived at the station a few minutes after I got there. She was crying and holding on to me, but I just wasn't present. The cops held onto my phone for evidence, recording the story into their own files before returning it to me. We got into the car and drove home, in complete silence aside from Jessica's sniffling. We pulled into the driveway and I shut off the car and sat back in the seat. "I think I'd like to be alone," I whispered. She seemed taken aback. "John, I don't think that's a good idea." "Please, I'll be in a few minutes," I said. I know how it must have looked, but it wasn't like that. I just needed to clear my head before I said or did something I'd regret. After a few failed attempts of changing my mind, Jessica got out of the car. She closed the door and made her way up to the front door, glancing back a few times before stepping inside. As soon as the front door closed, I burst into tears, holding my face in my hands and digging my fingernails into my skin. I could only think of the 2 missed calls. Was he calling for help? I was on his speed dial, so he may not have had time to dial 911. I was his only lifeline and I let him down. I could have saved him. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, and I raised my face from my hands, breathing heavily and glancing down at it. I pulled it out of my pocket and glanced at the screen, feeling that familiar feeling of dread and anguish as it notified me that I received a new snap from Richie. My hand began to shake once again as I unlocked it and opened Snapchat. The message was a video of my house, of Jessica talking to me and walking up the stairs, of me sobbing in the driver's seat as it slowly zoomed in until my face took up the entire screen, 5 words written out in the text box. "Jonathan Newport, lucky number 7. I jumped up the stairs to my house and burst through the door, looking around frantically. "Jess, where are you?" I yelled, glancing in various rooms. "We need to call the cops. I ran into the kitchen where Jessica was sitting at the table, phone laying on the surface with Snapchat open. She looked at me, face as white as a sheet. "John, what's going on? I'm getting these messages from Richie." I grabbed her phone and looked through the instant messages. There was a picture of Jessica taken from the back window, accompanied with a text box saying, "Call the police and I will kill you too." My heart feeling like it was going to burst out of my chest. Okay, we need to go. If we hurry, we can make a break for the car, and John, please tell me what's happening." Whoosh! We were thrown into total darkness as the power shut off. Jessica screamed as I stepped back against the wall, holding my arms out in front of me. I began to make my way toward her when the room suddenly lit up. I shielded my eyes and looked in the direction of the light, which was coming from Jessica's phone sitting on the table. It was a message from me. I reached down and patted my pocket, feeling for my phone before groaning. I left it in the car. The caption, 2 for 1. I jumped as a loud creak resonated throughout the house. Jessica gasped, and I clamped my hand over her mouth, listening. I recognized the creak as the loose floorboard directly inside the front door. I ducked into the pantry as the kitchen suddenly filled with light. Coming from what I could only guess was the flashlight on my phone. A dark figure stepped into view, and I quickly closed the pantry door, the harsh white light from the phone seeping in through the crack. I heard the familiar ding as he began recording, humming softly. "I'm going to hold him off. You make a break for the back door," I whispered, the light getting closer and the footsteps getting louder. Thump, thump, thump. "John, no. Don't argue. It's our only chance," I snapped, jumping slightly as he threw open the closet door directly across from us. Thump, thump, thump. The light was shining through the crack so brightly now that I could make out Jessica's face, tears gleaming from her cheeks. I didn't know if I was going to make it out of this, but I had to make sure she did. Nothing else mattered. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps paused in front of the pantry, the shadow of the figure seeping into the room. Ding. I started breathing heavily, standing and facing the door. The humming was barely muffled by the door, but it was clear that he was right outside, finishing the high notes. I watched the doorknob slowly turn, Jessica gasping behind me. Adrenaline pumped through my veins as the door began to open, and I threw myself against it, smashing the solid wood into the man's face. "Ooh," he cried out and stumbled backwards. "Jesco," I yelled and sprinted at the man, who began to raise his gun. I planted my shoulder into his chest and tackled him back into the counter. Bang, bang. I groaned as his fist slammed into my head repeatedly. I had no way of seeing when the blows were coming, and I began to lose my grip on the gun that he dropped. The blows kept coming and coming, filling my mouth with blood. I threw my elbow back and caught him in the nose. Crack! He groaned as his nose snapped and has lost his grip on the gun, falling back. I grabbed the gun and turned to where he was, or to where I thought he was. Bang! The instant light from the muzzle flash revealed that he was right next to me, wearing a balaclava stained with red. I turned once again and fired a shot, the window above his head shattering and glass pieces falling to the floor. He planted his foot into my stomach and pushed me backwards. I yelled as the gun slipped out of my hand and skittered across the floor into darkness. "Die!" A deep voice growled, picking up the phone and shining the light at me, blinding me momentarily. Ding! As soon as the video began recording, he was on me, pressing his free hand into my throat while shining the blinding light in my face. I gasped as his hand cut off my windpipe, clawing at his arms as I choked for air. The light moved closer to my face, but to me it was beginning to fade. I coughed as my final breaths began to leave me, arms swinging wildly. I winced as something cut my knuckles that I recognized as a piece of broken glass. My fingers grasped it and held it tightly, cutting my palm. I grunted as I put all my reaming strength into kicking upwards, catching the psychopath in the groin. He groaned and momentarily let go of my throat and the phone. I stood as quickly as I could and hobbled towards the back door, leaving the gurgling man behind me. I stumbled out the back door and collapsed on the grass, gasping for air. I could hear police sirens in the distance. My face rested on the cool grass, breathing heavily as I regained myself. "Ma'am, are you there?" a voice said behind me. I slowly turned my head to see Jessica's phone laying in the grass, a 911 call still running. A limp body lay next to it, hand outstretched towards the phone. Jessica, I called out, slowly dragging myself towards the body as the sirens grew closer, pulling onto my street. The grass became wetter and wetter as I pulled myself closer to her. The ambulance took us both to St. Andrew's Hospital. Jessica was brought into surgery immediately. The doctors said the bullet missed her vital organs, but their main concern was the amount of blood she lost. The cops told me that the man was nowhere to be found when they searched the house, only signs of a struggle and a whole lot of blood. I sat numbly in the hospital waiting room, replaying the events of the night over and over in my head. A doctor finally emerged from the operating room, his expression grim. My heart dropped. "I'm sorry, we did everything we could, but she lost too much blood. Jessica didn't make it." I collapsed into the chair behind me, tears flooding my eyes. I thought back to our last moment together, her terrified face illuminated by the flashlight. I should have protected her. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I considered throwing it against the wall, but something compelled me to look. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. A notification for a new Snapchat story update from Richie. Impossible. A video popped up, showing Jessica lying motionless on the operating table, doctors swarming around her. The caption read, "Could have saved her if you cared." What? How could he have recorded this? My phone buzzed again. With trembling hands, I opened yet another Snapchat notification from Richie, a selfie of him in the hospital parking garage, wearing a doctor's coat, an ID badge, and a mask covering his injuries. Another caption. "Thanks for the ride. She didn't make it.